Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvelous video. Wherever humans go, the extinction of wild creatures becomes imminent. That's what happened with 90% of the large beasts of Australia when humans stepped foot on the continent 45,000 years ago. And that's kinda what happened with dragons when the Valyrians found them 5,000 years ago. The mighty beasts of fire ruled a chain of volcanoes, but then the people of old Valyria learned how to tame and train them. One mighty natural disaster and one great civil war later, dragons seemingly became extinct from the face of the earth. So, how is it that such a fearsome species met its end? In this video, we'll explore exactly that and discuss how House Targaryen took for granted their greatest treasure. Let's begin, shall we? Oh, and by the way, beware of the dragon-sized spoilers coming up ahead for House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Origin of dragons and how they came to existence. At the end of the day, dragons are beasts, and all beasts have a place where they live in great numbers. So, how is it that they became known to man? And, more importantly, how did man learn to tame these magnificent creatures that some maesters believe are more intelligent than men? Well, the story begins several thousand years ago when the Valyrians found dragons lairing in the 14 Flames. Around 8,000 years before Aegon's conquest of Westeros, the Valyrians lived as shepherds in old Valyria. They were a rather peaceful flock of people who went by their daily affairs without any violent intentions per se, let alone the ambitions of ruling the world. But one day, these shepherds found something bewildering around a chain of volcanoes called the 14 Flames. The chain was close to the Valyrian Peninsula in Essos. If I have to compare it with real-life geography, I think the Pacific Ring of Fire is the best example. It's a 40,000-kilometer long and 500-kilometer wide horseshoe-shaped belt that covers the boundaries of several major tectonic plates. With almost 5,000 volcanoes, the belt witnesses most of the global earthquakes and eruptions. Likewise, the 14 Flames was a group of 14 volcanoes that was itself a part of a larger chain. The Valyrians found dragons layering in the 14 Flames, and the shepherds quickly became bewitched by the immense power of the dragons. Initially, they sent slaves to dig mines under the 14 Flames. Slaves from 100 nations dug day and night to search for gold, silver, iron, tin, and copper. And the worst of the worst slaves would be sent to the deepest sections of the mine with nothing but a red darkness, which was a red darkness filled with heat and magma. The mines in old Valyria were extremely hot, and as the miners went deeper, the conditions worsened. It was like hell under the surface of the earth. And although the miners perished by scores, the masters didn't care. In the end, Valyrians and dragons came face to face. But how did these puny humans control such humongous and powerful creatures? Well, according to legends, the Valyrians used magic learned from the Shadowlands on the eastern part of Essos, the eastern continent. With magic and sorcery, the Valyrians not only controlled the existing dragons but also learned to breed them. Furthermore, they used other weapons such as dragon horns, which were basically horns of dead dragons that were bonded with magic, and when blown, dragons would follow commands of the blower. Before we get into the breeding, let's address a more important question. How did dragons come into existence in the first place? Well, a simple answer is that they were born through magic, but then this does not really provide any scientific backing, does it? I think the logical explanation behind the existence of these fictional beasts was evolution. Even today, scientists are finding several microorganisms that live in extreme conditions, such as hot springs and cold deserts. There are also organisms that can survive in space. So, I believe that dragons were once small creatures that lived near the 14 Flames before the volcanoes went active. And although most of these primitive creatures perished, a few of them survived by adapting to the new conditions. Over time, they evolved into dragons. Now, this is just a theory, and of course, you're welcome to challenge it in the comments. But before we got into this discussion, I was talking about how the Valyrians bred their dragons. So, dragons are essentially reptiles, right? And like most reptiles, dragons too lay clutches of eggs. But while some reptiles may lay close to 100 eggs at a time, dragons do not lay that many. Nevertheless, these eggs are obviously quite huge and may resemble the size of a human head. And since they're dense and heavy like stones, they need to be carried around in two hands. The shell of a dragon egg is actually covered in scales that are of the same color as the dragon baby present inside, but they can't be hatched easily. And hatching a dragon egg is a notoriously difficult task. As the words of House Targaryen suggests, the dragon eggs need fire and blood to hatch. A parent dragon usually kills prey using dragon flame and roasts the egg in the same flame. When the Targaryens started the practice of hatching these eggs, they started using blood magic and sacrifices. They would burn a beast alive in the same fire as a dragon egg. Some believe that even human sacrifice was practiced when more than one egg needed to be hatched. If you think about it, Daenerys Targaryen strapped the witch named Miri Mazdur when Daenerys walked into her husband's funeral pyre with her dragon eggs. In the morning, everything burned away, but Daenerys was found unscathed and with 3 young dragons. But the last egg before Game of Thrones was hatched during the Dance of Dragon. It was the egg from which Princess Rhaena Targaryen's dragon called Morning was born. At some point, the tradition of keeping dragon eggs in the cradle of newborn babes was adopted by the Targaryens. But eventually, this practice died out because of the lack of dragons, and by extension, dragon eggs. Doom of Valyria, the event which killed most of dragons. Before I get into the details about the Doom of Valyria, do you know what happened in Pompeii? Well, it's more or less the same story, but with dragons and magic. After the Valyrians gained control over dragons, they soon became a force to reckon with. The shepherds had turned to brutal and strong masters who practiced slavery and started annexing kingdoms around them. They first went for the Giscari regions and annexed the old empire of Gi. Next, they moved further and invaded Andalos, the land of the Andals, who then fled to Westeros in search of new lands to occupy. You must have heard the word Rhoynar in House of the Dragon. Well, that comes from the people who used to live near the river Rhoyne in Essos. When the Valyrian freehold came for the Rhoynar people, they had to flee, and the warrior queen Nymeria came to Dawn with her people and married Lord Mord Martell to form a kingdom. By 314 BC, the Valyrian freehold had annexed an island on the Blackwater Bay, their first Westerosi island. By now, the Valyrians were ruling all of Essos between Meereen and Pentos, and their empire comprised half the world. But the 5,000-year-old empire was about to collapse. In 114 BC, Dennis the Dreamer saw the pivotal and prophetic dream about the doom of Valyria, a cataclysmic event that laid waste to the capital of the Valyrian freehold, its people, and everything nearby. And the fateful day did come, bearing death and destruction to old Valyria, turning it into a ruin. The 14 flames that once lit the night sky of Valyria exploded in a massive eruption and consumed the grounds in fire and ash. What followed was even worse. The ground trembled because of the explosion, and massive earthquakes were felt all around. These were so great in intensity that the Valyrian peninsula shattered into bits, only to give way to the ocean to sweep in. The meeting of fire and water became something called the Smoking Sea, a place so dreadful that even pirates are afraid of sailing there. The real cause of this destruction was never ascertained. Some maesters believe that the event was a natural calamity, while others are of the opinion that it was the Valyrian sorcery and magic that led to an inadvertent collapse of the 14 flames, and yet others believe that the Valyrians played with dragons, beasts that are magical, and such beings shall not be trifled with. Irrespective of what caused the disaster, Valyria lost all its knowledge, spells, and recorded history, but their most important loss was that of the dragon population. The effect of the doom was so potent that it killed dragons, which some say are fire made flesh. So there we have it, a 5,000-year-old empire destroyed in a day. However, all was not lost for the Valyrians because of the mighty families of old Valyria. One family survived. Dennis the Dreamer had alerted her father about the doom well before it actually happened. Lord Aenor Targaryen didn't take his daughter's words lightly. He immediately gathered his family, sold all holdings, took his dragons, and came to Dragonstone. This was the same island that the Valyrians had conquered a couple of 100 years before, and that's how the Valyrians possessed the only dragons in all of Westeros, or shall we say, the world. Aftermath of Doom of Valyria. With Valyria turned into a wasteland of ash and bones and the Heartland destroyed beyond repair, the survivors in the eastern and western zones of the Heartland started reasserting their claim and independence. A lot of political changes came to Essos, which saw a lot of wars and bloodshed. For 100 years, these factions tried to fight one another, and the century after, the Doom came to be known as the Century of Blood. Volantis tried to regain the status Valyria once had, but that never happened. The western side developed many free cities, while the eastern part developed, or rather exacerbated, into Slavers Bay. Furthermore, the Dothraki realized that no dragons or dragon lords were left to keep them in check. They started to sweep large parts of the continent and control the central grasslands of Essos, which is now called the Dothraki Sea. In a way, the Doom paved the way for a golden age for the Dothraki, because they got a literal free run. However, there was one city called Braavos that developed in the aftermath of the Doom. It was founded by the slaves who had escaped from Valyria, and Braavos became the most powerful of all cities in Essos. Dance of the Dragons, where most of the Targaryens' dragon died in a civil war. After Aegon's conquest, dragons flourished in Westeros for almost 13 decades, but then another disaster ensured that even these dragons perished. This time it wasn't a natural or a magical disaster, but an entirely artificial one. But it was equally catastrophic for the poor dragons. The old King Jaehaerys brought peace and prosperity to the realm, and it was only continued by his successor, King Viserys I. However, all that went for a toss after Viserys died. He had named his eldest child and daughter Rhaenyra the heir to the throne. But when his wife Alicent gave birth to 3 sons, everyone wanted that the eldest of them, Aegon, should be named heir. Viserys never wanted that, and he died resolutely. But Alicent and her faction would not have it, and there began a civil war between the two factions of the Targaryen family. While the maesters and historians called the war the Dying of Dragons, the songs called them Dance of Dragons. Both the sides had dragons with them. The dragons that fought for Rhaenyra's faction, or the Blacks, were Caraxes, Meleys, Vermithor, Silverwing, Syrax, Vermax, Arax, Tyraxes, Seasmoke, and Moon Dancer. On the other hand, the Greens had Vhagar, Sunfire, Dreamfire, and Tessarion. Apart from these, there were a few young dragons like Morgul and Shrykos, a few dragon eggs, and 2 wild dragons named Grey Ghost and the Cannibal. But as fate would have it, all of these dragons perished either during the dance or soon after. Vhagar kills Arax, and she herself dies in the battle with Caraxes. Vhagar and Sunfire together were responsible for the death of Meleys, the dragon of Rhaenys Targaryen. Sunfire also died from wounds that he had sustained in previous battles. Shrykos, Morgul, Tyraxes, and Dreamfire lost their lives in the storming of the Dragon Pit. Seasmoke and Vermithor died in the second battle of Tumbleton. As for Grey Ghost, Sunfire had killed and devoured the dragon. At the end of the Civil War, only Silverwing, Cannibal, Sheepstealer, and Morning were alive. Morning was the dragon born to Princess Rhaena at the dusk of the Civil War. After the war, Aegon III became king. King Aegon III was also called the Dragonbane because the dragons seemingly became extinct during his reign. He hated dragons after having to witness his mother being killed and eaten by Sunfire, the dragon of King Aegon II. Yet he knew the importance of dragons and tried on many occasions to hatch an egg using magic and other means, but to no avail. Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones began with a setting that established that dragons were a thing of the past, but then Daenerys receives 3 dragon eggs as a wedding gift. She travels with the eggs and tries to learn as much about them as possible. Because her elder brother Viserys was the only one with any knowledge of dragons, she sent one of her servants to please and extract information from Viserys. But the plan more or less fails. Later, Viserys is killed by Khal Drogo because the man was fool enough to threaten the life of the Khal's son in his presence. Daenerys had been under the protection of the Khal, but things took a drastic turn for her when the Khal suffered a wound in a one-on-one combat. The wound festered, and Khal Drogo soon became bedridden with little to no chance of survival. This was when a witch named Miri Mazdur offered to bring the Khal back to life, but she promised that life would cost a life. The witch does ensure that Drogo lived, but as a lifeless man. Furthermore, Daenerys had lost her unborn child. The dragon in Daenerys had been born. She killed Drogo out of mercy and herself walked into a pyre with the 3 dragon eggs. When the flames died and the ashes settled, her people witnessed history being written. Daenerys was holding 3 of her dragons, Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal, named after her husband and 2 brothers. Daenerys does her best to ensure that the dragons are not killed and becomes the mother of dragons. This is in contrast to how the Targaryen and dragon relationship was until the Dance of Dragons. The Targaryens used to mount dragons and considered the beast as pets. However, Daenerys changed that narrative and gave her relation to the dragons a more familial name. The dragons grew at a magnificent pace and soon became battle-worthy. However, Rhaegal and Viserion were smaller than Drogon because they were held captive for some time by Daenerys, and dragons do not breed well in captivity. Nevertheless, after many adventures in Essos, Daenerys came to Westeros and made her camp at Dragonstone. A few months later, Jon Snow, the king in the north, came to Dragonstone to seek help from Daenerys. She had dragon glass and 3 full-grown dragons, but Daenerys would not abandon her position just yet. Yes, she probably believed everything that Jon had to say, but she was afraid that Cersei would take back everything Daenerys had won. So Cersei had to be convinced, and the only way to do that was to bring Cersei one of the undead. So Jon left with Jorah the Andal and others to snatch an undead. But at the battle beyond the wall, the men get heavily outnumbered by the army of the dead, and Gendry is sent to seek help at the wall. They send a raven, and Daenerys comes just in time to help. A magnificent battle starts, and Rhaegal and Viserion burn thousands of the undead. However, Viserion is killed by the Night King and later turned. The Northerners, the Dothraki, the Unsullied, and the dragons fight together to defeat the army of the dead on the Long Night. However, I must say that the so-called Long Night lasted only for a night. That was just disappointing. Anyway, Rhaegal is later killed by Yoren Greyjoy and his fleet, leaving Drogon as the last dragon alive. Drogon loses his mother when Jon Snow kills Daenerys after realizing what she has become. Marvelous conclusion. Although Mr. Martin has not finished writing his book, it would be interesting to see which turn the book takes as far as the future of these dragons is concerned. But even if we go by the show, Drogon is still alive. Does that mean that more dragons could come to life? Well, according to the Game of Thrones universe's lore, dragons can change their sex at will, and a male dragon can turn female to lay clutches of eggs. Does this mean that the dragon species is not extinct just yet? What do you think? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.